Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, session 2 with Dr. Matthews. We're just going to give people time to come in, give it a few minutes to start. So making sure you guys can see the slides there. Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon on a Friday. Welcome to all the attendees that are joining in for today's webinar. With Dr. Matthews. This is session 1. If you miss this is session 2. If you miss session 1, you can reach out to the team here, myself, Julie, or Jessica to get the link for the session from last week. Let's see. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay. Always want to have some technical difficulties this week. Just to tell you guys how technical difficulties can happen. Helping out with a webinar this past Wednesday, and I was off site. All of my coworkers were on site, and the internet just shut off. So all the panelists that were actually physically in person, we lost everybody. So just want to tell you guys that, sometimes these things happen, but it's 1 o'clock, so I want to welcome you guys today to the session 2 webinar with Dr. Mike Matthews. Just a little bit of logistics. He is going to be presenting to you guys about resiliency, and this is the second session. If you have missed the first session, please reach out to the team here. Jessica and Julie will drop their emails for the link that you can get to watch session 1. If you have questions, please direct them to the question and answer chat, as I will be feeding them to Dr. Matthews, or he'll be looking in the chat to get the questions as well. So if you have your questions, please ask them, ask away, feel free. There's going to be some time in the middle of the talk sometimes to ask questions and answer them live. So just want to welcome you guys. Want to tell you guys about NavalX. NavalX is the Navy's super connector. And what we do is we partner with organizations. Well, one of the things we do is partner with organizations just like Don Sapro, so that we can bring you wonderful content like this, that you guys can get your certificates, your CEUs, get wonderful information just to expand the knowledge that you guys have. So we're all about connections and making these connections. And so just want to thank you guys, welcome you guys. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who is going to welcome you from Don Sapro.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and huge thanks to NavalX as well as our StratCom folks for helping pull all of this together. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, just to give you a little bit of background on this series, we started the Standing Watch webinar series when we recognized that there are some unique stressors our first responders face during COVID-19. And one of the things we've been excited about is the interest more broadly from leaders in terms of the importance of addressing some of the challenges around connection, building trust in these kinds of remote contexts. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, is specifically resilience. So right now we're in part 2, as Ashley mentioned, of our 4-part resilience series. And we're excited that Dr. Matthews is again joining us for this. Dr. Matthews is a psychology professor at the United States Military Academy. He's written extensively on a number of areas relevant to the military, with a focus on resilience, the psychology of war. And I'm really excited about the book that he and retired General Kaslan are about to release in a month or two on the role of character and being an effective leader. And for anyone who's missed the previous session, it's also important to point out that Dr. Matthews has both uniform and first responder experience. He's a former law enforcement officer. And so a lot of what he writes about is both scientifically sound, but also based on his experience as a first responder. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Matthews.
Hi, everybody, and there, whoever's running the slides, if you put my first slide up, please, appreciate that. It's good to be back. Welcome to those of you who were here last week, and welcome also to those who are joining for the first time this week. Really enjoyed last week, seeing where everybody was from, so if you want to put into chat like where you're dialing in from or joining from. Let's see, there was one from Japan last week, and people from all around the United States and a couple other crazy places. So if you just if I can see the chat and look at that, it's pretty interesting. There's Colorado Springs and Florida, and I'm thinking some real, in Naples, Italy, my God, that sounds pretty good. Tucson, Germany. I've got some German beer my wife just bought me sitting in the refrigerator. So perhaps this evening I'll enjoy a little German culture indirectly. So yeah, cool. Glad to see everybody where you're in from and keep those coming. So you guys go to the next slide, please. So I don't know about you, but I've had this, we were talking, the people sponsoring this and I were talking before we started the session, how it has this definite Friday feeling. We're all kind of low energy. And found this photo, just took it off of Google Images. And I think we've all had a day like this or two where you just want to stick your head in the sand and avoid stuff, you know, you get news fatigue. You don't want to, you don't want to listen to any news and hear the bad news that gets piled on us day in and day out, and the political and social spin that gets put on it, and all. And it's okay. It's okay to stick your head in the sand now and then. It's probably not the, I'll drop the word probably. It's not the most effective strategy to approach personal resilience. Let me go to the next slide. I would suggest to you that maybe this is more what resilience is. And I really like this cartoon because it gets at the notion that there's a lot of resilience tools, more than we could possibly cover in the 4 sessions we're going to have, that I have the pleasure of having you with. But we're going to talk today about one set of these tools. In fact, some of these tools might help you fly over the barrier or dig under it or run around it, run fast, or just knock it down there with a hammer, dig a hole under, whatever. But the one I'm going to focus on today is, I think, some very useful and exciting and easily applicable tools that you can use to enhance your ability to deal with the hard times and the bad things that life inevitably throws at us. And all kind of has to do, in general, with a topic I'll just call character. So character strength. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about the role of character in resilience. I mean, positive character attributes. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown on a classification scheme of human character traits. You can kind of see what the left and right, boundaries are in terms of types of character traits that people may have. And you may find it kind of surprising if you haven't looked at this. If you just ask somebody how many positive character traits are, sometimes you have 4 or 5 pretty easily, like honesty and courage and 2 or 3 others. But it's pretty extensive, the toolbox we have within us in terms of the strengths that we can carry to our challenges in life. We're in this for the long haul. I think one thing makes the pandemic difficult when you overlay that upon all the things the rest of us, the other challenges all of us as human beings deal with anyways. There's just no end in sight, So a lot of you are getting ready to make a decision about, for example, well, what are you going to do with your kids this fall? Are they going to learn remote? Are they going to go to live classrooms, some sort of blended thing? And I'm sure it's just human nature to second guess that, if you want to send your kids to school, physically to school, and there's many good reasons to do that. In the back of your mind, you're saying, but why, what if they get sick, or if a teacher gets sick because of that? On the other hand, if you want kids to stay at home and optimize health, they're not getting the full enriched experience of school. And the point just being that we're not going to have a solution on August 19th or something. This is going to be an ongoing issue. So in the face of those types of circumstances, I think a focus and a discussion about character and how it can help all of us sort of win the day and get us over through this period is useful. So I will build in time as we move forward here periodically for some comments and questions, and save a good chunk of time at the end for questions as well. So next slide, please. So just as a quick reminder, particularly those who missed the first session, it's hard to believe I spent almost 90 minutes on basically one slide, but the point of the session last time was to say that really there's lots of ways that people respond to adversity, and the press pays more attention to the one called disorder, so PTSD and depression, and those are very real, you know, and need to be attended to. But fortunately, they are the least likely of the four trajectories. So some people may just sort of be invulnerable. You know, they just sort of soldier on and don't really show much change. That'd be invulnerability. And then a big chunk of us are resilient. You know, we encounter a, you know, difficult situation, and yeah, we get depressed and a bit anxious about it. But over time, you know, we adapt and overcome, and everything is kind of gets back to normal. And then at the very bottom, just to recapitulate, there are those of us who are lucky enough, or those who are lucky enough, that when they encounter hard times, through reflection and probably through some character strengths, they're able actually to grow from the experience. And again, you know, I won't give personal examples, but I can say that, you know, many of my West Point colleagues and other war fighters and police officers and firefighters I've dealt with in the past, you know, really feel like despite the challenges and things they had to face in the line of duty, that they're really a better, stronger person, you know, because of, hey, Camp Lejeune, I've been there, Michael, Michelle, that's a great place. People are polite at Camp Lejeune. Sorry for the digression. That just popped up on my screen. I love Camp Lejeune. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. So let's just talk a little bit about positive character and resilience. So I guess the point I'd like to make is that there's a science of character, of positive character. This is not just Matthews's opinion. Okay, there's almost, you know, really many scores of years of scientific psychological research that have systematically and sort of empirically and scientifically looked at character, but really more so than ever in the last 20 years. So over the last 20 years, I would say that a true science of character has emerged. And one of the things I did earlier, about 12 years ago now, I mentioned this in the first session, is I was called upon by the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, General Casey, to be part of a little 4-person team advising him on how to develop from the Army's perspective, an institutional approach to dealing with suicide and conduct disorders and substance abuse disorders. A lot of the bad things were happening that were linked to 6 or 7 years of continuous combat operations. And, you know, the sense I had when I talked about with him, and he laid out what the problem was, is that had he come to us in 1997 or 1998 instead of 2008, psychology would not have had as good of an answer. And the reason they wouldn't have had as good an answer is because the science had not matured. So it's kind of a great juxtaposition of the science of character becoming available at just the time when, you know, one big organization, the Army, but of course the other services as well, were feeling overwhelmed from all those years of warfare. Now, is there not a pretty good parallel between many years of warfare, no end in sight, things like the pandemic, right? So the soldier, the airman, the sailor, they all have to deal with their normal life obstacles anyway, in addition to the things that happen in their professional pursuit as a warrior. Police officer, the firefighter has to deal with all the things on the job, but also at the same time deals with all the mundane, normal problems we all face. And now we have, again, this pandemic, which no end in sight, no clear solution yet, although I'm optimistic there will be one. And in all of these cases, there are aspects of this character research which are very encouraging to me in terms of helping us do better in life. So the bottom line, which is kind of up at the top here, is that learning about our strengths, this the purpose of this session, but learning about our strengths of character and then employing them sort of intentionally and thoughtfully employing them to overcome obstacles has clearly been linked to resilience. So there was a very, very well-designed scientific study that was published close to 10 years ago, where a very large sample of just average people who were dealing with the problems average people deal with, which can be from, all the problems we all deal with. And they were instructed there was a control group, right? So this is really a well-designed study, but I'll just focus on the experimental manipulation. Those in the experimental group were instructed to do one thing. And here's what it was. It's so simple. So as part of your homework assignment, I'd ask you to take that values and action inventory strengths, and it identifies a hierarchy of your 24 character strengths. So in this assignment, they were told to do that, or instructed to do that, and identify their top 6 character strengths. And I'll show you what they are here in a subsequent slide here in a minute, what the 24 are. Take their own unique top 6 strengths and intentionally and thoughtfully apply them to whatever their problems they had that week, okay? So then there were follow-up assessments of mood, positive and negative mood, and other things that happened for a year or so after this 1 week of practice, following this practice. And the results were really powerful. So as a group, the people that just took the time to think about their strengths, learn about them, and then apply them, probably what they learned was there was some instrumentality, some cause and effect to here is a strength I have, some sense of self-efficacy now that I can use to deploy against difficult challenges. And follow-up showed that these people were happier and less depressed for up to 6 months following that 1 week exercise. That's pretty incredible. So some of you may have had experience with your family or with others, or maybe yourself, or you've maybe even taken antidepressants, for example. And actually, if you look at the results of this intervention, it compared favorably, if not a little better so, than the antidepressants, and without the side effects of drugs. So, I'll say again, I'm not a clinical psychologist, and I'm not trying to dispense medical advice. The only advice I have, if you have significant problem yourself, definitely go see a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist and get that type of help. But it's encouraging to think that there are things that all of us can do that are that effective that help. Now, there's some other interventions in that particular study that were studied, and there are 2 that I'll mention are here at the bottom. And we can talk more about these in the chat here in just a minute, or discussion if you want to know more. But these are 2 more things that you can do that have been shown to increase mood, decrease happiness, decrease depression. The first one is called the 3 blessings exercise. It's not exactly, I guess it is a character manipulation, because what you're doing is trying to increase the character strength of gratitude. And psychologists have found that if you focus on gratitude, that focus on the positive things like gratitude sort of detracts from the negative things that may be plaguing you. So in the 3 blessings exercise, and the Army calls it hunting the good stuff, it's as simple as this. You keep a diary. It could be digital, or it can be an old-fashioned handwritten diary. And every night before you go to bed, take about 5 minutes and just reflect on the day. Reflect on that day, the events of the day, good and bad. But pick 3 things that you thought went well that day, and you write them down. What went well? Okay, well, whatever it might be. But don't stop there. Add another couple of sentences on why you think they went well. If you do that once a day for a week, those who did that for once a day for a week found sort of similar response effects: happier, less depressed, and that persisted for quite a long while. Simple, no drugs involved, no therapy. It's just something you can do on your own. It doesn't take very much time. And then another thing that was very valuable is called the gratitude visit, or also known as a gratitude letter. It sure looks like gratitude as a character strength is very powerful in modulating, increasing positive emotion, decreasing negative emotion. This one's real simple. Also, you think of someone in your life, it could be a teacher, or an aunt or uncle or a friend who's done something really significant for you, who's really helped you out, but you've never really thanked them properly. And so there are probably a couple of ways of doing this, but the way we instruct people to do it is you then write a letter sort of laying out in sort of black and white, what they did, why it was so important, why it was so meaningful to you, and thank them, overtly thank them. And then, instead of mailing it to them, and certainly not emailing it, you make an appointment to see them physically, and then you stand there, you read them the letter. I'm going to pause and let you think about that. So how do you think you're going to feel? So typically what happens, the person reading the letter cries a little bit, and the person getting the letter cries a little bit, and they hug, and then they're really happy. And it turns out to be a very powerful mood in inflating, raising sort of exercise that lasts. It has legs and lasts for quite a little while. You can do it that way. I did have the experience of doing that sort of a little less formally a number of years ago. For some weird reason, hard to imagine why, but I got invited to be a part of my high school's Hall of Fame. So that probably says more about my high school than it does me, but that's kind of neat. And so I've been gone a long time from high school, and the organizer said, well, you can bring a guest. You can bring a date, basically. Okay, so my wife, Gretchen, she couldn't go. We live in New York. Home is back in Springfield, Missouri. So she was busy at her work, and she couldn't go. So I said, who should I take? And it occurred to me to ask my high school English teacher, who was like the best teacher ever. And I think I really credit her turning me from a C+ student in high school into a straight A student in college. And she just had such a huge impact on me. Well, she was retired. I called the principal. Can you track her down? Well, yeah, we can. And so I called her. And when I invited her to do this and be my date, it was really, really meaningful. I don't think I've ever seen anybody smile as big as she did then, at least when I picked her up, a couple months later when this happened. So I don't want to belabor that too much, but those are 3 examples of using a strength, 3 blessings exercise, and the gratitude visit that are just like exemplars, just examples of some of the things coming out of this scientific research on character that I think can be of value to you and in your lives. Let's go to the next slide. And actually, maybe this is a good time to just take a knee and see if Jess or whoever's monitoring this, see if you see any questions that you'd like me to address.
Hey everyone, I'm just jumping in here. I don't see anything in the Q&A, but if you have anything and you want to jump on with a question, you can either raise your hand or type something into the Q&A box so Dr. Matthews can field it.
I see the question from Margaret. What do you think leaders' role is in reinforcing exercises like the 3 blessings? So General Kazan and I, when we think about this, in this book we've written, the way we divided up the book is he is a strategic leader, 43 years in the Army, division commander to corps commander. He's led at every level. So his lens, he's not a psychologist, his lens was leadership, a person who's led in the most extreme situations. And my foxhole was that of a scientist who's been a scientist for 40 years. But together we agree that the real solution, for those of us who work, is the actions that our leaders and that our organization can take to maintain an environment that is positive, that rewards positive behavior, positive atmosphere, has a method for detecting deviations from that and dealing with those when they occur. So we spend time talking more specifically about what leaders can do with an organization to do that. I have a whole chapter on, I think it's called, It's Not Just About You, which is just to say it's about the leadership and sort of the climate that the leaders are able to craft into an organization. So you probably work for leaders, maybe, that they're very task oriented and they're not very people oriented. And, all they really care about at the end of the day is achieving the mission. And, if they hurt feelings along the way, that's all right. And, and maybe if they get promoted to the next level, that's even better, but they don't really care much about you. And we find that, however, that organizations that have embedded in their mission statements and their mission philosophy, a genuine caring about the members of the organization, and specific principles and steps towards achieving that really do better. So I do a lot of work with a professional basketball team down in San Antonio, called the Spurs. And they're a great example of that type of organization with great leadership. So Coach Popovich, if you just Google Coach Popovich and look at some of the tricks he uses, the techniques he uses to keep that team's cohesion so good. And granted, they've had an off year this year, but if you look at the last 25 years, regardless of shift in players and shift in management personnel, they're always good. And you have players that came in that maybe weren't part of that, and coach has a way through his leadership of instilling those character attributes and reinforcing them in new players. And so I'll stop with that, except to say that at this point, that could be a whole nother seminar, webinar, and how to pull that off. Any others? Then we'll go on. Oh man, autocratic leadership, how does it fail? So, you're welcome, Margaret. I would almost argue that autocratic leadership might work in very limited, discrete, short-term situations. So, to draw a military example, if you're at a squad level or a platoon level and you've got the order to attack an enemy emplacement, there's probably a time to be autocratic, and just do it. And you don't have a lot of time to get, the squad leader's opinion on it or the fire team leader's opinion on where, how about do it. You're just going to have to go. But I think you're talking about more meaningful leadership situations spread over time. And in those cases, the elements of good leadership come down to trust of the leader. And I said this last time, trust is not just competence. Trust is not just competence. Trust is also a belief that the leader has high character, that they're honest, and that you can believe what they say, and that they also, the third element is they care. They truly care about the subordinates. So that the trusted leader is competent and has high character and is high caring, and that's not autocrat. That's not an autocracy. So I think we should move on at this point. I'll come back with more questions in just a bit. So next slide. So here's just a chart which captures the sort of the theory of character that I generally use. This was developed by a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, and his colleague or associate at the University of Michigan, a guy named Chris Peterson, who's unfortunately passed away a few years ago now. But together, they have this basic question. Okay, so we believe that positive character matters, but what is it? And so they looked through all the psychological literature. I mean, they just did what science nerds do. They looked at previous journal articles and read hundreds of them and found some character attributes which were positive and started compiling them. And they said, but that's not enough because scientists don't have the market cornered on characters. They looked at all the great religious teachings of the world. And so they looked at Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and all around the planet, looking for commonalities. What attributes of human nature do all the religions really, value the most? And, religion is very important, but they don't have sole ownership of this either. So they looked at all the philosophers they could find, all the way from Aristotle to contemporary philosophers. It was quite an endeavor. And they came up ultimately with this they would call it a classification scheme, where they identify what they refer to as 6 moral virtues. And they're the things in color at the top. So these are not individual strengths. The things in color are sort of categories of character strengths. So for example, what the first category you see is called strengths of wisdom and knowledge. So within that, there are 5 subordinate character strengths You can read them, creativity and curiosity and so forth, which all kind of pertain to this larger moral virtue called wisdom and knowledge. And so I would call those, and we'll talk about these in 2 weeks, I call those strengths of the head, okay? And then there's the second stovepipe, the second pillar is our strengths of courage. Well, there's bravery. Now, quick to point out that bravery is far more than physical bravery or physical courage. Even more so, it's moral courage, the ability to do the right thing, the hard right over the easy wrong, as we'd say at West Point. Persistence, which is a lot like grit. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that next week. Persistence, ability to hang in there. It takes courage to just keep banging away at hard tasks. Integrity, right? Integrity, you can also think of this as an honor, can be thought of as a form of courage. It's maybe where more moral courage falls in. And then vitality, you could also call that zest, Z-E-S-T, the energy to approach life. So I won't read through all the rest of these, but notice there's a category called justice. You know, are doing things the right way, teamwork, fairness, good leadership. Strengths of humanity, these kind of like strengths of the heart. Capacity to love, can you really love others? Are you kind to them? Social intelligence, do you understand them? Temperance, as you can see, forgiveness, modesty, prudence, and self-regulation. I guess I am reading them all. And transcendence, appreciation of beauty, gratitude, hope and optimism. These are things that help you rise above the affairs of the day. Humor helps in that, and then spirituality. So most of my research the last 15 years has looked at the empirical question are there particular strengths or are there a constellation of strengths that help, from my perspective, what I've looked at mostly, are help soldiers do well at soldiering, okay? Or help soldiers recover from soldiering, right? So to recover from combat deployments. And if you're a police officer or a firefighter, your combat deployment is 8 to 10 hours every day, except for weekends, your days off, usually not weekends. And, you know, so you do get some time at home. And to me, I think in many ways, that's more challenging than being gone for a year and can be just end up being over. And then those who work in the SARC world, you know, it's a similar thing. It's you know, how can you marshal or challenge these strengths to overcome the adversities you encounter in the job. Next slide, please. So I'm going to show the chart again in just a second. And all I want you to do is if you got a scrap of paper, now you may have already taken this values and action survey, and that's fine. If you've got your results, we'll get to you in just a second on that. But if you haven't had a chance to take it, I think it's to be kind of fun to do. I'm going to put the chart up for 60 seconds. And I just want you to write down, just based on your own informal assessment, just what you think your top 6 strengths are. So I'm going to start timing right when the next chart comes up, and you can advance the slide, please. Okay, take 1 minute and just think about that. And again, pick out the 6. They could be all mostly from one category or spread across, it doesn't matter. The 6 that you think most characterize you. While you guys are doing, I'm just looking at some comments. Daniel, Reed, your comments are really important. Try to save that for us for the general discussion. And I also understand difficult in changing your spots, but I don't know you have to. About 15 more seconds. Okay, I'll say a few more words. Leave this chart up to say a couple more words if you're still thinking. So the nice thing about character strengths of the 24, they're all good, right? So how you use them to overcome a problem partly depends on your own strengths, you know, what you're good at. And so we'll see, it also depends kind of on what the nature of the problem may be. So somebody mentioned, just looking in the chat, said, after 41 years in uniform, it's difficult to change my spots. And that's an interesting question because, you know, what we would tell you with regard to the character strengths, you don't have to change your spots. You just have to learn what your strengths are and then learn how to use them more systematically. So Dr. Seligman, who came up with this theory, he thinks that it's futile. So imagine your worst 6 strengths, the lowest 6. And my worst ones, by the way, are appreciation of beauty, spirituality, and a couple of others. Those stick out. And it's not that I lack spirituality. It's just it's something that I don't, or appreciation of beauty. It's just something I don't invoke in my day-to-day life as much. Now, if I'm being shot at in a foxhole, spirituality might bubble up and be pretty important to me, right? The old saying, there's no atheist in foxholes, probably comes into play. So let's look at the next slide. And our goal here is try to figure out kind of what your constellation of strengths are. So some of you did this homework assignment. Those of you who haven't, that's fine. But we're going to send you out the slides. And if you just click on this link later, this will take you to the site where you can register and finish the survey. It takes about 15 minutes. It's going to give you a rank ordering of your strengths based on your input, not just your subjective analysis. And I'm really interested in all those you have not yet taken it, but did sort of come up with your own unofficial list. It'd be interesting to me to know, maybe if you come back next week, you could tell me, how close was your subjective analysis to what the test tells you? There's likely to be a lot of overlap. So if you just ask me blindly, what moral virtue most of my strengths come in, I'd probably say perspective and wisdom. Not that I'm all that wise, but love of learning stuff. And that turned out to be true. The other thing I'd mention is the third bullet here. When you do get your results, some people get kind of freaked out because they may think of themselves, let's say, as being a very spiritual person, but on the list of 24, it's say 18th. Well, that doesn't mean you're not spiritual. In fact, you might be more spiritual than the person to your left and right. It just means maybe you're high in all strengths and some of the others were just higher than spirituality. So when you rank order things, by definition, something has to be last, right? And so don't fret if a strength that you think is that you value, you think is important, doesn't pop up quite as high on sort of the formal results as it does from your own subjective opinion. Next, please. So this is a fun drill too. So you can take a minute and do this while I'm talking. And Alexa, you'll get the slides, absolutely. So look at, I just created this chart, and the ones you see filled in there are my top 6. So of knowledge and wisdom, love of learning actually was the only one that popped up in my top 6, even though I'm a professor, and you kind of think that maybe curiosity would be high too. I think I am high in curiosity. I'm high in persistence, which falls into the courage category. Pretty fair person. Maybe that comes from grading undergraduate exams for 40 years. Like I want to do the right thing. Maybe from being a police officer and wanting to treat people fairly. Now I have no strengths of humanity in my top 6. Those were kindness and social intelligence and capacity to love. And I'm maybe a little bit like Data from Star Trek Next Generation. I'm a little bit like that. And so, but rather than kind of overwork that and try to get better in that, I just work on the ones, continue to use the ones I'm good at. Temperance, very good self-regulation. And pardon me, as I say, it's really bad practice to use foul language in a webinar, but I'm going to do it anyway. You can piss me off, but it doesn't last. I can think of very, very few instances where I've had a run-in with somebody, whether it's my fault or theirs or nobody's, that I bear a grudge. I'm not a grudge bearer. And I'm high in gratitude. Now, if you do this yourself and just kind of pencil these in, and you could either just mentally or just physically write them down, it's interesting to me to look and see if there's any pattern to it. So a lot of people, they will be sort of spread around, across the 6 moral virtues. Some may be clustered more. There's space for 3, but you could have 5 of them out of knowledge and wisdom. It's possible. So we're going to get at this in just a moment. But what I think when you look at your top 6, there may be certain patterns of strengths that lend themselves to certain occupations and certain types of endeavors. So as a professor, right, love of learning is important. To do research, you can't give up. I've got to keep working at it. I got to be fair in grading and evaluating student input. I've got to be willing to get, so I write these books, so how do you do that? I'll tell you how I do it. As I get up in the morning, I sit in my chair until I write 1,000 words, then I stop. Sometimes I write 1,200, but if I have had 999, I don't stop. I write 1,000 words a day. I mean, I write 1,000 words a day. That's what I do, period. And that's not easy, but I can keep doing it. And then gratitude, being thankful for the good things of life, that helps a lot. But look at your own sort of and reflect upon your own pattern and keep that in mind as the ensuing discussion unfolds. I think we go to the next slide. So here's this notion of character in context. People in different occupations perhaps show different strength profiles. So I'm going to put up the strengths chart again in just a second. And when I do, go to the chat box and enter 1 or 2 or 3, if you wish, top strengths you think, for example, an artist. Let's say Van Gogh. Just say an artist, a painter, an artist would have. So I'm going to go to the next slide and just enter in the chat box. I'm sorry, not teacher yet. Just go back. Van Gogh here, sorry. Just enter in the chat box now. Creativity, obviously everybody's looking in. Anything else? Yeah, lots of creativity, vision. Patience, appreciation of beauty. Hope, absolutely. So some of those fall from transcendence, the caring about something bigger than you. I love perseverance. I think almost every professional needs that. All of these are good, right? All these are great. So let's just do the same thing now. Let's hit pause on this one and let's go to the next slide. Just do the same thing, but do it for a teacher. Let's say a high school teacher. Now we're doing teacher. Yeah, not too different from Mike. I love capacity to love is important. I agree. Bravery, yes. So I think you see that the point here that if you did this systematically and you measured, let's say 1,000 teachers and 1,000 artists, you would see it sort of different. There'd be some overlap. There tend to be a constellation of different types of strengths that people either have those strengths migrate to that occupation, or perhaps being in that occupation shapes those strengths as well. And let's do one more. So next slide. So I know a lot of you work in sexual assault. I think SARC is the right acronym for the Navy folks. What about SARC? What would but if you're not a SARC person, this means those who work in sexual assault and harassment. Oh, these are lovely. Kindness and hope, love, empathy, integrity. Perspective is really, really important, right? Justice. Thank you, everybody who's typing these in. These are really, I don't know if the system captures these. I'd almost make this the basis of a blog or something. It's very interesting to capture all of these. Thank you for your input. So I think you're getting the idea. Let's go to the next slide. And I don't remember why I put this back up here. I think it was just, again, to talk about, where those various strengths might fall. So here's one more thought. With regard to character and context, those in the uniformed services, if you read The Art of War, if you read Shakespeare's writings about war, if you read any historians from ancient historians to modern times, read contemporary military doctrine, which I try not to, but sometimes we do, you'll see that it's not a new idea that character is an integral part, maybe the most important part to leadership, military leadership, and also soldiering writ large. And our nation's services all recognize it. So the Navy has core values. I love the Navy because it's easy: honor, courage, and commitment. I can remember 3 things. Army has 7, as you see. It challenges me sometimes. 3 I can remember: honor, courage, and commitment. The Air Force has core values. Not sure why I bulletized them because they're a little bit longer, I guess. Integrity first. And that maps to honor. Service before self. You know, selfless service. And excellence in all we do. And then there's the Army. We just got to have 2 or 3 more than everybody else. That actually makes a mnemonic called leadership. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So I've done research with West Point cadets, for example, and I've given them this assessment of strength, the 24 strengths, and then looked at which ones were highest. And among that sample and some other military samples I've looked at, military people tend to come out pretty good on these things. So I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg thing, and maybe young people are attracted to come to a service academy or to join the military, enlist in the military. Maybe they already have these attributes and they see the military as a venue where these strengths can play out. But don't we as trainers and developers just do our darndest to instill these even further, to instill them or strengthen them in those who already have them to some degree? So I think it's just an interesting comment that in our profession, the profession of arms, there's universal acceptance of this idea of the criticality of character. Next, please. Yeah, and I gave a jillion West Point cadets, a whole bunch, many hundreds, actually thousands of cadets this test, and found one thing I thought was really interesting is indeed West Point cadets. This is not unique to them. I'm pretty sure if we use Naval Academy cadets and Air Force Academy cadets and ROTC folks, it'd be very similar. Very high on honesty, hope, which is a good one. You know, hope is not a plan. I recognize that, but hope is a good thing. A belief that things are going to get better. Integrity. We'd all agree that without integrity, there can be no leadership. Bravery, both physical and moral, and then teamwork. That's reassuring to our chain of command at West Point that cadets come in. These were assessed at entry, so they came into the institution pretty high in these, and we do our best to promote and nurture those even further. But I also involved and had 2 control groups. One was just U.S. citizens of the same age who had had some high school and some college, so they were same age, kind of same education level. And then I had Norwegian Naval and Army Academy cadets, and it turns out, despite the sort of significant cultural differences between the United States and Norway, I've spent a lot of time in Norway with those services, and they do have a different perspective. Our cadets, our military personnel have more in common in terms of the character profile with their Norwegian counterparts than they do their own countrymen, men and women who did not opt to join the military. So there may be a band of brothers and sisters which transcends national borders. It's a thing of being in the military, and they tend to reflect these characteristics that the military's value. Okay, next. Okay, so we're going to take another pause in just a moment, but let me get through one or 2 things. So in terms of your own strengths toolkit, here's kind of what we've said. So if you haven't done so already, take the time to identify your hierarchy of strengths by taking that. It's called Values in Action Inventory Strengths, or VIS. Take that, and then write down from 1 through number 6 your strengths. We call those your signature strengths. A signature strength of mine is self-regulation. If I really need to self-regulate, I can do it. But what I also want you to reflect on your other strengths. Are there some that, while lowering your hierarchy, that really stand out in other situations? Okay, so you may find yourself at work, pulling on your signature strengths, but in other venues, in your family life or in some other aspect of your life, where some of the ones that are not in your top 6 are still really valuable to you. And it gets to the bottom point, which I think is one of my major messages to you, is you become self-aware and build your strengths toolkit. I want you to think about matching your tools to tasks. So not everything's a hammer doesn't fix everything. We try, but it doesn't fix everything. It's nice in a toolkit to have a hammer and a screwdriver, a wrench, and so on. And you wouldn't use a hammer to sand down a board, and you wouldn't use a screwdriver to drive a nail. So it's really important to think about your character strengths as being like tools in a toolkit and applying them judiciously and matching them to the task. So next, please. So for example, what you see here is results of a study I conducted a few years ago now, where I gave a survey to about 150 mostly Army captains. There were a couple of Marine Corps personnel. These were ground combatants who were just returning from this right after the surge, from 12 to 14 months of being in company command, for the most part in company command in Iraq or Afghanistan. And these were really hard times. Some of you lived through it. These were times when units were taking some KIAs and lots of wounded, and just a lot of stresses involved, a lot of things going on. And the first question I gave them in this survey was an open-ended. I asked, well, just write a paragraph about something that you found really, really challenging during your combat deployment. And I kind of thought it would be something like kinetic, somebody got shot, or something along those lines. And there were some of those. But I think, but the responses I got tended to be, and this is perhaps because these people were company commanders in charge of 150 people, the responses they found most challenging were organizational ones and bad leadership ones. And parenthetically, I'd say I've worked with some officers who have PTSD, and informally, because I'm, again, not a clinician, but just speaking with them as to kind of be a coach. And every single case, in no case was it because a friend was killed in battle. It was always because of bad leadership inflicting this negative mood upon them that really resulted in a lot of clinical sorts of symptoms. One of my colleagues at West Point, a full colonel, I won't say his name, but he deployed to Afghanistan. He was a PhD in philosophy, deep thinker about transcendental things and things that matter, meaning of life type things. And he encountered toxic leadership at the 06 level, at the level of a full bird colonel. And his solution was he committed suicide in theater and left 4 children and his wife in Lee housing area without a father. Now, that's not a good solution, okay? But the point being that the stresses of combat aren't always kinetic. The same with police work and the same with being a SARC. It's not always the specifics of the job. Sometimes it's the organization itself. So what I then asked these guys to do is, and at the time it was guys, it's an all-male sample because of the combat restrictions are still in effect at the time. But anyway, I didn't ask them what their top 5 strengths were, or top 6 strengths were. I said, I arranged a way to probe which strengths did they use the most to address that problem. Repeating. So the numbers you see 1 through 5. So this doesn't mean that Captain Smith's top 5 strengths were teamwork, bravery, capacity, love, persistence, and honesty. This is that Captain Smith said, these are averages now, the captain said, to address problems we encountered during intense combat deployment, teamwork was number 1. Bravery, and by this they mean moral bravery, moral courage, just as much, if not more so, actually more so than physical bravery. The third thing was capacity to love. That you really have to love your soldiers, love the mission, and want to do the right thing for people. It's a strength of humanity. Being unwilling to give up, persistence, and then honesty. So just for fun, I just gave you the lowest 5. So if these combat leaders, prudence or it wasn't very important. Interestingly, spirituality, they didn't list a great deal. Curiosity, didn't really win the day, nor did creativity or appreciation of beauty. It's not to say they were lacking in those strengths, but those weren't the ones that they used to address these problems. So the reason I take time in giving you these data, and we're going to be done here about 5 or 6 minutes, we're just open to general discussion, is that I want you to reflect upon your job and what you do and think again to the 24 strengths as being collectively a toolkit. You've got your top 5 strengths, your actual top 5 strengths, but you've got 18 others, down your toolkit. Like I don't use an all AWL very much in my toolbox, but it's good to have it in there when you need it, right? So let's go to the next slide and surprise myself and see what we've got here. I think I remember. So I thought you just might be interested in this along this same theme. So in talking with the Spurs leadership, the GM and the director for player personnel, and these couple and some of the former players, I asked a question, and we just really spent a lot of time dissecting this chart. It's the same 24 strengths that you saw earlier, just depicted a little bit differently. And so remember our goal, your goal in your life is one of pleasure, engagement, and meaning. I mean, you want to enjoy life. There's hedonic pleasures of a good meal, a good run, a good exercise session. The hedonic feels good to you now. There's the goodness of engagement, engage in something that matters to you, where you lose a sense of time, something you really enjoy doing. It could be racquetball, it could be golf, it could be reading, it could be a lot of things. And probably even more important, something that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. So just think of that circle as being the goal. Now, for a basketball player, they're the same way. These are the best of the best. It's incredible. It's so incredible to me to sit down on the court side or at practice up close, 10 feet away from these amazing athletes and just see how good they are. But you peel all that away, they're just like you and me. They want a life of pleasure, engagement, and meaning. And so we got to talking about with these experts, well, for an NBA player, what does that mean? Well, the first thing we think of as fans is your points per game or rebounds per game or on-court performance. So let's talk about that. Which of these strengths, and here, use chat box if you like, which of these strengths are most important for on-court physical performance, do you guys think? Yeah. I'm just reading persistence, self-regulation. Oh, yes. You wouldn't believe how hard, yeah, you probably would, how hard these people work. Yeah, so everybody just kind of look at the chat box and see. So just kind of continuing on that theme. So think about those. But then the next question is, well, okay, so you play basketball, you play maybe 2 or 3 games. 3 games would be a pretty big week during a normal NBA season. Well, and the Players Association kind of limits the number of practices. They don't want to, risk too many injuries and have too onerous a pack. So there's a lot of time they're not practicing or playing games. So they got a home life. Most of them have families. Most of them have children. And, their family's just as every bit as important to them as you. We don't think about it. We just see them on the court. But, they want to go home and they want to get well. So let's think about now for that aspect of their life, for being a family member. You just think of yourself, which strengths, let's go back to chat again. What are the strengths do you think are most important for that? Love. Oh, yeah. Hope. Yeah. I hope you all are looking at the chat box and we'll read them all, but those are all great, right? Love. So just as you're typing those in, what I'm seeing, I think, are strengths of humanity and some strengths or moral virtues of humanity and transcendence coming into play, particularly for raising the family. And so then you can kind of continue around, and we're not going to continue this line of thinking much longer, but saying the various aspects of what it takes to be a professional basketball player. And what you come away with is this. It's no one thing. So the concept of grit is really popular right now, and I'm partly responsible for it because I did some of the original research with Angela Duckworth on it, and we think grit's really important. But grit is just one of, if you could think of it as being like persistence, that's one little thing out of one of 24 strengths. And it's great for being willing to practice lots of hours and develop the skills you need to be the player on the court. And it might play some role in family relationships and other domains. But all of us, no matter what your occupation, no matter what we do in life, we need to come to think of our strengths as being this toolkit and learn to nurture. Let's just talk about the level of the moral virtues, because there's only 6 of those. What from courage can we pull from? Now, remember earlier I asked you to take your top 6 and kind of put them into which of those 6 virtues. So I'm probably going to pull from courage. I'm going to pull a little bit from transcendence because I'm good at gratitude. I'm going to pull from justice and wisdom. I'm going to use humanity as best I can. Okay. I'm pretty good at temperance in terms of self-regulation. But if you look at yourself and where your strengths fall within these 6 domains, it helps you develop a more informed and conscious approach to how you might leverage your own strengths to overcoming challenges. So I'll just ask you to maybe fill this in. You're going to get the slides, print it, and just color in the ones that you think you're good at. And then second step, come up with a plan. How can I use my persistence? How can I use it? How can I use my social intelligence to do better? How's humor going to get me through this? And so on. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to devalue this, but we could spend time. I think if you look at a SARC worker, you can just say, it's okay. Stay there just a second on that slide. SARC worker, if you colored in the most important strengths for that person, it might be a little bit different from the NBA player. But what they would have in common is you would have strengths from the various 6 moral virtues and individual strengths. There'd be a pattern. A pattern that might be a little bit different, but in both cases, you probably have to pull from more than one bucket, right, to be good, be well adjusted, and have that life of pleasure, engagement, and meaning. Next, please. Okay, we're getting close here. Good question is, so what can we do as leaders? What can organizations do? All of the services are doing this. They have different names for it. Army was the first. The Army came up with this program called Comprehensive Soldier Fitness. They were probably the first to do it because they were in the worst hurt box at the time of the services in terms of the impact of ongoing continual warfare on soldiers' well-being. So they developed this thing called Comprehensive Soldier Fitness, and it focuses on assessing how well we're doing. Now, last week I showed you a bell curve of test scores that sort of measured resilience. That came from something called the Global Assessment Tool or test. So if you're in the Army, you take this GAT, I think it's once a year, it might be twice a year. I know you can take it at least once a year. And you get feedback from that. And so you're red, green, or what? That's the bad color. Red's bad, green, or yellow. I guess yellow's in between. And if you fall into yellow or red, you get suggested things you can do to address that. And these resilience modules then that you can tap into are specifically designed to enhance either emotional resilience or fitness, social resilience or fitness, family, social resilience or fitness, meaning and purpose. And then we've added a 5th, really, it's very, very important, health, fitness, and physical fitness and wellness. The 3 blessings exercise is one example of a resilience module that enhances emotional well-being. But there are similar approaches for social and family. Now, is CSF effective for battalions and units that worked at it and believed it, set time aside for it, and the leader bought off on it and encouraged the soldiers to do well? It was very good. For leaders for whom it was just another ruck in their rucksack, it wasn't so great. So from an organizational perspective, whether it's comprehensive soldier fitness or something else the Navy or Air Force has come up with, they can be good, but it takes organizational buy-off and support from the leadership, very top leadership, and all the levels down to really make it work. The science is good, but you've got to encourage and reward your soldiers, sailors, or airmen for doing this. So that's just one example of how an institution might go about approaching this. Okay, next. Just some good practices. We may come back to these next week. Army has something they call the performance triad. You look at that, so it's not rocket science. You're probably aware of it. Good sleep. I'm going to come back and amplify on this in a subsequent session. There's some specific things I can tell you about sleep will help you. Nutrition, exercise, and fitness. So we'd say the triad, the performance triad, if you do those 3 things right, you'll be a stronger, better, gooder, right, at your job than if you don't do those things. Make social and family relationships a priority. Nurture the good stuff. Nurture those relationships. If you don't have them, seek them out. If you have them, they're not great, work on them. You've maybe heard about mindfulness. It's sort of a form of meditation. Doesn't take very long each day. I practice mindfulness. The way I do it's not very sexy. I mean, I'd be taking my shower in the morning. I like to take a couple of minutes because I like feeling the water hitting my shoulders and my head. And I just sit there and I think about my day, what I'm going to do, things I want to do well, things to be thankful for, things of that nature. And the interesting science behind that is that people who practice mindfulness, it protects against things like PTSD and depression. There may even be a biological basis to it. So I don't want to get too nerdy on you, but there is a chemical in your brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Just trust me on that, BDNF. And BDNF is like miracle grow for your brain. So if you got a lot of BDNF, it's like really enriching your brain. So studies have shown, and controlled studies have shown that practicing mindfulness increases the amount of BDNF in your brain. So it actually has a physical effect on you. So you can learn more about that easily on your own, or we can talk about it in the chat or in the next session. And then from the institutional perspective, learn about and use the available resources you have. If you're an Army person, then CSF is one approach. But community mental health agencies have tools. Almost, I think every branch of the military has things you can reach out to as well. Okay, next. Okay, looking ahead, next week, we're going to really focus more specifically on the personal body armor. I'm going to add to that. I'm going to spend opening 15 minutes or so on grit, the idea of grit and resilience. I'm going to tell you how to grow grit in yourselves and perhaps your children, if you're interested in doing that, things you can do to enhance that. Talk about a concept called hardiness, kind of similar. And then I do want to spend, it's not here on the slide, but I want to spend more time on that performance triad, use some more information on that. Then in 2 weeks, our last session, kind of a fun one. I use my Wizard of Oz analogy of the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, and we'll approach that. Yeah, Angela Duckworth. Next slide. So if you click on that, whoever's running the slides, see if that comes up. If not, you can do it at home. So I published a blog for Psychology Today, and this may come up or may not, but I recently published one on military psychology lessons from the pandemic, or the pandemic. I guess it's not going to pop up. It's okay. You just go back to the slide. But if you want to read that blog, you just put my name in and put pandemic and Psychology Today. It'll pop up. And whoever's running, I lost the slides here. I think at the end anyway, so it doesn't matter. Can you bring the slides back up?
Sorry, Dr. Matthews, clicking on the link made it freeze.
Oh, that's so, we can just stop with that. So I was just going to say, again, thanks for your time and so forth. I'd rather spend the next, 20 minutes or so just answering questions anyway. There's death and there's death by PowerPoint. We've already accomplished that. So let me just open the floor to any questions you might have. And Jess Gallus, Dr. Gallus, you can help MC that if need be.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike. We were just testing your resilience there with the slides.
And remember, forgiveness is my biggest attribute. So even though I'm pissed off, it'll be okay.
I see we've got a lot of, I'll have to send you my my character strengths after the fact. I see we've got a lot of differences, which creates some interesting conversations about team performance. I know that I believe that Lisa Mott, you may have had a question. And so if you do, we can unmute you now to ask. Ashley, are you able to unmute Lisa to see if we can get her on to ask a question? Okay, Lisa, it looks like you're unmuted now if you have something still.
No, I don't have a question. I probably just hit a wrong button. Unfortunately, sorry
Okay,
about that.
no
Listen,
worries.
this has been awesome. Oh my gosh, Dr. Matthews, I love the material that you've been going through. I've been taking a lot of notes, so just feedback is just phenomenal. I wish you had been one of my college professors.
I hope I get to profess again. It's not much fun teaching over the internet. I mean, I love doing, you know, in March we got switched at West Point, and all these cadets I love and care about so much, and knew them very well because I'd had them in class 60 times when we went remote, and so it worked okay, but not to see their smiling faces every day was tough.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Appreciate the feedback. Mike, we've got a number of questions coming in. One of them is a question about gender differences in terms of character strengths. And the question is, have you noticed a difference in top strengths for people with the same jobs, but of different genders?
You know, I don't think that if you look at the totality of the science coming out of it, that gender is a major, oh my God, there's Matt Swiergas saying something. Hey, man. Anyway, guys, Captain Swiergas, come on the live here in a minute. I want to say hi. It's one of the few areas of psychology where gender differences, you know, let me restate that. If you look at the psychology of gender differences, like in cognitive differences, there's very few. So you hear about like women are a little better at verbal tasks and men are a little better at math. And that's only true if it's true at all. It's not just testing artifact at the most extreme ends of the distribution. And with character strengths, I think that's even more true, that being a human being trumps being a male or female when it comes to these strengths. Now it may be that culturally, that depending on the traditionalness of a culture, that women may learn to exercise and manifest those strengths more frequently because of the types of jobs they go into or the roles they play in society. But in terms of there being sort of a XXXY, you know, genetically driven difference in character strengths, there's no evidence for that. How's that for an indirect answer?
Love it. Thanks, Mike. It looks like Ashley has brought in Jeremy for a question. So she will unmute him now, and go ahead, Jeremy, once you're unmuted. Looks like he's still muted.
I know what I do on these sometimes. I'll be on there and muted, and I'll run down and get a cup of tea or something. Or
I wonder, I'm like trying to unmute, but I wonder, let's see if we can get another one in the meantime. How do we go about, and maybe we already talked about this a little bit, but how do we go about instilling grit, not only for ourselves, but our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines? How do we set the conditions for instilling grit?
I'll address that a little bit, but I'll mostly defer until next week. But
okay.
But the point would be, so when I first started studying characters as a scientist, I looked at it as an individual attribute, as something you had or you didn't have, you had in some degree. And it was kind of maybe based on 20 years of development, if you're 20 years of age, or maybe a little bit of genetics or both. But it's primarily an individual thing. And the more I study it, the more I think about it, the more I'm coming to the point of view that the character strengths, to include grit, that we as individuals display are more than anything else influenced by the social environment that surrounds us. So if that's true, then the leadership of a unit is of the utmost importance in shaping grit and these other attributes through reinforcement, through praise, through modeling, through encouragement, and somewhat through education, showing the importance of for example, selfless service and in order to achieve unit goals. So it's kind of simple. The broad answer to that is that more than anything else, I think the social unit be it the work unit and a leader or the family unit and the parents are instrumental. And that the strengths that you have are not just so like in your heart someplace. That interacts with your social environment a great deal. And I will definitely delve more into grit next time. And I hope you sign in next week because then we can pull on that string in more depth.
We've got a question here, Mike, about the key character strengths for SARCs and maybe more broadly. I know we've got other first responders on the line. Have you done any research in that area that you can highlight some of those character strengths for helping professionals and or first responders?
Now, I haven't, conducted any of my own studies of it. I would say with almost certainty that if I scratch around in the scientific literature, I can find it. What I would guess is that there's a combination of moral virtues that are important. And it goes back to my analogy of the basketball player. So on the one hand, there are probably strengths, moral virtues of wisdom and perspective and knowledge that are really important because you want to build the expertise and to understand the ins and outs of sexual assault, harassment, and the rules and the regulations that you have to enforce and all of that stuff. But strengths of humanity, in fact, let's make it easier. Let's talk about 3 strengths. Strengths of the head, how smart you are. Strengths of the heart, how you feel. And strengths of the gut, courage. Just think about 3 sets of strengths. Well, strengths of the head would be important, but how you cope day in and day out, off duty and on with some of the issues you deal with as a SARC, a lot of that's going to come back to strengths of the heart, right? How you understand others' behavior and reactions, your social intelligence, your sense of forgiveness, your sense of kindness would be important. Now, maybe that constellation of strengths, that set of strengths which are favorable for a SARC, might not be the same constellation as someone who's a frontline law enforcement officer. I think they're both important, but my guess is that as SARCs, that strengths of humanity in the heart are pretty important. I can do some research and see if I can find an empirical answer to that, but I bet you that's been done. Because there's a lot of research in this area on different occupational groups.
That's a great point. All right, we've got a number of questions that continue to come in. This is an interesting one. History reports that supposedly beloved leaders, generals, have deeply flawed, in some cases, character traits. How do you reconcile this? Were the flaws hidden from their troops? Did the troops look beyond the flaws because there were more important characteristics to what they were able to accomplish?
So in the Character Edge, General Kaz and I talk about a case study that you'll be familiar with. And it's no secret, so I'll just say his name, General Petraeus, 4-star general, director of the CIA. Actually from my town I live in. I live in Cornwall-on-Hudson. He was born in Cornwall-on-Hudson. And from the time he was a little kid all the way through West Point, through 95% of his Army career, he was like the poster child for what a leader should be. And then the history. So it came to light after he was CIA director that he had this affair with, was it Paula Broadus, something like that, and it had given her some classified information, and anyway, it was resulted in his downfall. And so I think that's a great example. How it is perplexing. How can someone who, by all intents and purposes, was such an exemplary leader, and then something like that happens? Well, also in the Character Edge, I propose I'm going to revert to nerd mode for just a minute, because I think it really applies. Because it can apply to us. I've done bad things in my life, and I'm not going to tell you about them. Things I'm not proud of, and you have too, and I don't need to hear them. Why did we do it? And so I think there's these 3 general factors which are risk factors to poor character. And the first circle, and think of these as being like a Venn diagram, they all kind of come together in the middle. And the first circle of risk are this is the nerdy part, I call it intrapersonal. It's a personality flaw, or it's something about the way you view the world. And so psychologists talk about something called the dark triad of personality, and it has to do with Machiavellianism, psychopathology, and just basically not using people in bad ways. So if you have that element, and there's other aspects of it, of interpersonal things which could lead to bad characters, but it's things that you kind of carry with you. So if you're like that, if you have those tendencies, that doesn't mean you're going to behave badly, as you'll see, maybe not. But whether you change jobs or retire or go do something else, those are going with you. They're part of you now. Okay, but they occur in a context, and the second circle in that Venn diagram, your social/organizational culture. Social could include family, but it also includes your work group. And let's focus on a work group. You're talking about a military example. So, what's the nature of the organization in terms of its adherence to and genuine support for, supporting and reinforcing good behavior, good character, and punishing those who don't do it, don't display that. And I can give examples from our book of some military organizations that weren't good in that respect. So what happens when somebody who's got this dark triad meets a bad organization? Can you see how that increases the chances of that person doing that? Well, I don't think that's the case with Petraeus. I don't think either of those really were a case. He certainly doesn't have the dark triad personality, and he generally works for an organization that values these. But the third circle of the Venn diagram is the environment, and the environment that you're in, and the one you create yourself. So these things happened at the end of many years of combat operations. I don't know General Petraeus personally. I have friends who do. I have a friend who's his aide, and he said the guy sleep 4 or 5 hours a night, get up at 5 in, run 6 or 8 miles at a 6-minute pace. He lived on power bars. And, you see his body build is thin. So he was violating the nutrition part of the format triad. He's violating the sleep part of it, so nutrition and sleep, and he's probably overdoing exercise, if anything. But he also contributed to that environment, by depriving himself of sleep. And he had some control over that. And I think if you look at that center of Venn diagram for each of us, think of the times you've not lived up to standard, is probably some intersection of those two or more of those 3 circles of risk that come together at a given point in time. Now, I think that last point's an important one too. Maybe it's because I'm a forgiving individual. At that point in time, things came together and he made some errors in judgment. And so there is science which shows that continued sleep restriction impairs moral reasoning and ethical judgment. It's there. We can show it. Okay. Well, if you're a senior Army leader or senior Navy leader or senior Air Force leader or senior leader at IBM or any big company, you're probably working 90 or 100 hours a week and setting yourself at risk for these types of failures. So I won't say a whole lot more about that, except to say, just in conclusion, that when you try to analyze a particular case, it's valuable to consider the context that's occurring in, the nature of that individual, how much support they had, and was it a flash in the pan error? And it wasn't a one-time error. So I kind of think that if General Petraeus were here, he'd be the first to say, man, I screwed up, wish I hadn't, not going to do it again, So I'll pause on that. Hope that gives you something to think about.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. That's great perspective. And I think such an important point on some of the stressors that leaders are up against and how when you lose some of those basics like sleep, for example, I mean, we know with, some of the senior leaders who've died by suicide, that you know, we know in some of those
Yeah.
instances it was perpetuated, you know, by loss of sleep over an extended period of time. So I think
Yeah,
that is a performance triad.
yeah, and I've got to clarify too that to understand something is not to say that you can't that you can excuse it. So as a leader,
Correct.
if you're a subordinate or a peer who's behaving in that way, you've got to, your first line of attack is to take care of the misbehavior. But you also need to see what's going on in the, you'd ask yourself as leader, is there something wrong with the organizational social climate in my command that's setting the occasion for this? What can I do to change that? And are there things I can do going forward to help others who've been affected by this develop better habits and, strengthen the character strength stuff we talked about at the beginning is one way to attack that first circle of intrapersonal. Those can brighten that circle and make it stronger. But you can't, there's some things you can't ignore. You can't, remember that first slide, you can't stick your head down in the sand and ignore some of these things that have to be dealt with.
Yes, if it were only so easy. If one of the, and I know we've only got a handful of minutes here, one of the additional questions we have is around leadership. And when people lose faith in leadership and they're now resistant to some of the trainings that the military is putting on around resilience, hey, I don't trust, if my leaders can't get this right and now there's a disconnect and they're saying we need to do this resilience training, what do we recommend? Are there, I think more broadly, maybe this question goes to what other levers can we use in addition to training to help foster resilience in our teams, especially when leadership trust is missing?
Well, I think that's an actually accurate observation and concern. And in the perfect world, I would love to have a session like this with the Joint Chiefs of Staff first, and make sure that every strategic leader and down to operational leaders at the beginning understand and buy off on the importance of these things we're talking about. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be a bad one that slips through now and then, it's going to happen, but it is terribly disenchanting to have a leader who says one thing and does another. And so, it can really undermine, within a battalion, for example, comprehensive soldier fitness, as well as it was designed. If you have leaders that don't support it, and you can tell by the way they roll their eyes when they talk about it, or say, okay, here's your yearly set of an hours of PowerPoint on CSF, any questions, that kills it. And I'd really have to think more about, what the solution is. That's what's called a wicked problem, right? That's hard to address, but I think it's got to be kind of like combination of top-down approach to educating our leaders on the importance of this aspect of the human element, and at the same time providing programs and support for the rest of us, to improve ourselves.
Can you, and I know you've already talked about this some, Mike, but can you talk a little bit about how character strengths evolve over time? So we've seen some folks chime in here to say, hey, every time I take this, I get something different. And, maybe that's a reflection of where I'm at in my life, or, if these effects last for 6 months, does that mean the positive aspects wear off after that?
Well, you do have to keep, you have to keep after this, and so I wish there was a simple thing you could do, any of us could do. If I did this, the strengths exercise once and be happy the rest of my life, that'd be great. Obviously that's not realistic. And I think one lesson from this is if we make positive character and make as an objective a goal state having important meaning and importance, meaning and purpose in our lives, whether it's through character strengths or better sleep and nutrition, and the other things we're going to talk about. Really, if you're practicing mindfulness, the first question you should ask yourself when you wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, is what have I done today to optimize meaning and importance in my life? And that builds perspective, right? So that could be, I spent an extra hour with my son or daughter today. I left work on time. I didn't work 2 hours over, or whatever it might be. But there's there's it's true. And I mean, as far as this test goes, none of these psychology is not physics. It's not perfect. And if you take the test, twice in a row, let's say a month apart, the correlation between the two tests will be about 0.9. They'll be kind of generally the same, but individual scores will flip-flop a little bit. But probably, if in my case, if spirituality was the last 24th place the last time I took it, it's not going to be first place. It might be 19th place if I'd had a particular week, right? But you can grow strengths. And now, let me just, maybe this is a good note to end on. We can pull on this some more next time. One of the most important pillars of West Point's character development program is that depending on what the cadet did, if a misbehavior or an honor case resulted from essentially a failure of character, well, one thing we can do is just kick them out. Poof, no problem. We get another cadet. But you know what? We didn't bring that cadet here because they were lacking in merit. You know, they have SAT score of 1,500. They were high school class president. They were, first in their class. Whatever, all these things that make up a cadet, and they made an error. And some things you can't forgive. Some things you're going to have to kick them out. But a lot of things can be dealt with. And so we have something called the Honor Mentorship Program, where the idea is that we take a cadet who's made an error of character and enroll them in a lengthy and intense mentoring program that lasts up to a year, perhaps delay graduation a year, but give them the opportunity to rectify that and then go forward and graduate and be an Army officer. And our experience has been extremely positive. I'll give you an example next week when we have time. A cadet I worked with who got a DWI, and he's one, and he just finished Ranger training now. He's going to be one of the best officers we've had that we've graduated in a long time. When you encounter a crisis in life and you recognize a failure and you work hard for a year to get better at that and overcome that, it's like a bone that's broken. Sometimes you break a bone and it resets and it's properly reset, the bone is stronger than it was before it broke. I'll stand on that thought.
What a great last thought to end on. That is spot on. I think there's so much more work we've got to do on how do you recover from setbacks and failures. And so we appreciate it, Mike. We appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. To all the folks in the field who called in from all over the world, from Kuwait to Italy to all over the US, we appreciate it. We will be back with Dr. Matthews next week for another round on resilience. And feel free, for those of you who are getting these invites, feel free to forward to folks you think may be interested, and remind folks that they can come in at any time. They don't have to have watched the previous sessions. A quick plug for those of you who are on the line to take our survey. And, we're always looking for feedback. We're still working through some of the technical pieces. So please, we really want the feedback and we really appreciate it. Dr. Matthews, is there any last comments you wanted to share with us before we drop off for today?
Oh, I'm just still reading the comments, and somebody said, it's not just practice, it's deliberate practice. And you're so right. So we're going to cover all this stuff. And I'll say one thing. If you really have a burning question that you want to address one-on-one, hunt down my email address. It's not hard, and just email me, and I'll set a time to either email back and forth or we can talk. That would be fun. So that's fine to do that if you want.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Matthews. Thanks to the Naval X team. We really appreciate it. And to all of you on the line, have an awesome weekend, and we will see you next Friday.
Jess, I'll redial back in.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Mike.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Bye.